here we have Masuma Ahuja. So we started talking to Masuma in 2016 when she was at CNN in New York. We interviewed her for a little segment called Leading Millennials. She was one of the first to be interviewed, where we talked about where she saw her career going, what she wanted out of media and journalism, and look where she is now. So now she joins us from London. She is building a girl-focused media startup, and she's committing to it publicly here on Splice Beta. Uh, Suma, you're amazing. I've seen you pivot your career over and over again. You now have your second book that's coming out. You've done a lot in in the past couple of years. How does it feel?
It's weird even hearing you talk about when we talked in 2016 and how I saw my career going. And I hadn't thought about the answers I gave you then because I'm not doing anything I thought I would be, which is hilarious and great.
How do you get to this point of well, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Girlhood?
Okay.
What got you to this point of wanting to create this, and what are your plans?
Sure. I'm gonna share some slides so you guys can see what I'm thinking. And thank you for having me here. And it's cool to talk about this to an audience of mostly women, because that is generally not how it goes. And I feel like you guys are just going to be more receptive. Um,
We
so
also have a bunch of startup founders here, people who support startups, people who fund them. So this is definitely the community that you want to cultivate.
yeah, thank you for having me. I hope you guys like the idea. So I'm going to start with my own origin story because I feel like you can't really tell the story of what you're doing without telling the story of how you got there. And I was watching one of your earlier sessions about funding, and someone said the best way to pitch yourself is to start with your origin story, which I thought was a great way of framing things. Um, as Alan mentioned, I worked at CNN and the Washington Post. I started out at the Post after a couple of months at a then startup news organization. And my job was always this weird job, which I imagine many of you have had, if she does the internet, and no one really knew what that meant, except she does the internet. And like, there was a period of time where no one knew who I worked for, including my direct manager, because they thought I worked for someone else. So it was always like, oh, Masuma, she covers things, but also on the internet, and I do print. So like, clearly she works for someone else, which also meant I just like had all this leeway to do whatever I wanted. But my like broad remit was always bring young audiences to the Post, find new ways to tell stories, which I think I interpreted that to be find new ways to tell stories. I don't know if that was actually part of my remit, but I didn't feel like you could go on to digital and social platforms without actually like changing your storytelling and your reporting styles. So I did things like launching the Post in Snapchat, which was a really fun thing to like go into very serious meetings with like like senior editors who were discussing, the future of US politics and being like, hello, I'd like all of you to download Snapchat. And they'd be like, what, you want us to sext? And I was like, no, I don't, but please all download Snapchat. I launched them on Kick. I did lots of stuff with structured comments and changing the way we use comments to tell stories. I played around with voicemails. And I was always working for the national desk, but my job was like slowly broadening out beyond actually like covering anything that was national news or political news, which was what my job was technically supposed to be. And I went to CNN, where again, I had kind of an amorphous and not amorphous job where I was brought in to launch CNN on emerging platforms to bring young audiences on there. So again, it was like all the same types of things where I went on all the different social platforms, launched CNN in places like Line, Facebook Messenger, helped build Facebook Live strategy, Instagram story strategy, did all of that. I was kind of getting a little bored of it because I'd like figured out what to do and wanted to do other things. Started playing around with storytelling. And just, I like to match very analog mediums with very digital mediums. And that's always kind of been my way of doing things. So it was always things like, like one of the things I did a lot of was voicemail storytelling, because I think voicemails are the coolest thing in the world and the only millennial who feels that way. But I remember early on at CNN, I was just like bored at work, and I didn't like anything I was doing. And my bosses were like, okay, we have no money for you. Go out and do something interesting, like make something cool. you have $5. I'm like, okay, great, thank you. Thank you so much for the $5 and for giving me a week. And I was living in New York at the time, and I went around New York City. I printed out flyers, the kinds you see where like roommate wanted, and it said, tell us your love story. And I had to like negotiate with the legal department and like where I was allowed to put up flyers and like get permission from laundromats and like pizza delivery shops. And they're just like, who are you? And like, why are you asking us all these legal questions? But went around and put up these flyers, had a phone number, and people started calling in and sharing their love stories, which is really lovely and very like not CNN. I did another thing where I wanted to, this is like kind of what got me down the path I'm on now, where I wanted to like think about how to tell stories meaningfully about women around the world. And so much of our coverage of gender is very like single tone, very often in international media organizations. And my questions were always just like, hey, what does life look like? And the reporters that I would talk to in these places had really great thoughts and stories that they would tell me, but they were never actually reflected in the journalism, not never actually reflected, but like very rarely reflected in the journalism that like made the homepage or like made the tweets and the Facebook posts and all of that. So again, my budget was like very, very much nothing, but I bought a bunch of disposable cameras and I sent them to CNN reporters and producers around the world, and told them, give it to a woman you know. And like that was my only instruction. They were like, what kind of woman? Do you want it to be a woman who has a sad story? I was like, no, just a woman you know who has a child, because this is going to be a portrait of motherhood. And they were given very basic instructions of like, this is how you tell the story, if this is how you use a camera, and take some photos of what your life looks like. For example, take a photo of what you had for breakfast, take a photo of your kids going to school that day, like show me your bedroom if you have one. And the photos we got back were beautiful. And like some of them looked like they belonged in like Nat Geo. They were like stunning photos. And there was also so much that was similar in the photos, right? Like there were themes that were emerging because everyone likes to take photos of their children because they think their kids are cute. Everyone likes to show you their like the happy things in their lives. Like people don't like to show you like the sad parts of their lives, which is also wonderful because you rarely get to see that. There were lots of like very blurry selfies, which were great. There were always like photos of the kids with whatever toys they had. If it was one little teddy bear that the kid had, like there was always one photo of the kid and the teddy bear. Like you always got that. And the more I was doing this kind of stuff, I realized that like that was what I wanted to, those were the questions I wanted to think about, was how I grew up on two sides of the world between India and the US, and I went to college in England. I never felt like the parts of the world I was from translated well to each other. Like we didn't have a good understanding of elsewhere, wherever I was. And I really wanted to change that. And so I quit my job at CNN, decided to go freelance. I had very little of a plan, except I was putting my life into storage and moving into a suitcase. And I was going to go out and find stories. And my initial plan was, I'm going to be a freelance reporter and like go out and do like the one story every 2 weeks, and it'll be cool, and I'll write for different places and like get to do things on all the platforms I want to do things on. And then I realized very quickly that the way I had already known this, but it's very different being on the other side of things. But the way we tell stories about gender falls into three like broad buckets, wherever in the world you are, whether you are in Singapore or you're in India or you're in New York or you're in Germany. It's stories of victimization, stories of sexualization, and stories of the exceptional girl fighting back, so the Malalas and Gretas of the world. And these are all important stories, but if this is the only thing you are getting about what it is to be a girl in a place, there's just so much context missing, right? Like if all you think of is like, I was in India at this time, and like so much of the reporting in international news was about rape and about sexual violence, about child marriage, which are all like important and necessary things to cover. But I was realizing as I was having conversations with editors who had never been in these places that like they thought this was the only thing that life looked like. And that was my struggle of translating like, this girl also, has a life around this thing, and this is a feature of her life, not the only thing in her life. And that was like, again, that became like the big question I wanted to answer, but that isn't really a question you can address in mainstream like news, because news tends to be, we like to cover things that are happening, right? Like we want an event, we want something, there's like solutions journalism, otherwise we want a problem you can solve. We don't want like, this is what life looks like, because we don't think that's interesting, even though that feels like very necessary context. So I went back to my friends at the Post, and I don't know if all of you are familiar with the Lily. It's a product of the Post, which is like geared toward millennial women. And I pitched them a series where I wanted to cover ordinary girlhood. So it was going to be stories of ordinary teenage girls around the world. And as I've said, a lot of like the work I had done was I have a lot of, I was telling Alan and Rashad this before we started, I have like a lot of, I wouldn't say imposter syndrome, but I wonder a lot about my position in telling people's stories. And like, I'm not the best person to tell anyone's story except my own story. We are all the best people to tell our own stories. And that was something I wanted to bring into this, where I didn't want to be like, hey, I'm going to tell the story of ordinary girls without actually knowing what the lives of ordinary girls look like. So I wanted to share, I have a platform. So I wanted to share my platform with them. So I decided to get diary entries from teenage girls because it felt like a very familiar medium. I think most girls at some point in their life have had a diary, kept a diary. It's like everyone I've talked to has been like, oh yeah, like I had a diary for like that year when like I was really heartbroken and angsty and like I was fighting with my parents a lot and like just needed an outlet for it. So it was very familiar, right? Like it's a place we know how to tell stories. And in voicemails, diary entries, I was realizing that there's also like a confessional quality to it where you know you have an audience, right? Like I wasn't asking girls to, like their parents consented, they consented. I wanted to make sure I didn't publish anything that was going to come back and like haunt them 10 years down the line. But also like it's a space where you're not performing as much. You know, like if you're posting an Instagram story, you're very conscious in that moment of like, oh, this is what my audience is going to think about it, or like, oh, I got like 3 likes for this and I actually wanted 13, let me delete it and like repost it, and you know, felt cute, might delete later. Like that wasn't the ethos of a diary entry. Like you're not sitting there thinking, oh, I shouldn't write this. Like you just start writing and then you write the thing, which I really liked. So I had 12 girls from 10 different countries. I wanted to get a couple of girls from the same country as well, because like I wanted to be clear that this wasn't the story of what it is to be in a country. This was just the story of one girl in that place, right? Like this is just her life. And I provided a lot of like the reporting and research around to give readers context of her circumstances, her country, her community. So it wasn't just like a, hey, this is what it's like to, there's one girl in the series who lives in Jordan, in Zaatari, the refugee camp, and she writes about seeing a man who, she has like a little doodle of this, a man whose leg was blown off in the war. And she writes about like getting really worried about that and worried about the impact of the war. But if a reader doesn't know anything about why she's there or where she lives, it would just be very like disorienting and confusing. So I did that. And it was really interesting, the feedback I got as well, where I feel like it fell into 2 broad buckets. One was I want to give like money to help these girls. And I would get very angry emails from people being like, can you connect me with this one girl who wants to like, I want to buy her shoes. I was like, okay, that's not the point of this, but thank you. And then the other side was, it was really lovely. I got a bunch of messages from people saying things like, oh, I read this with my daughter. It used to go out on Sundays because we liked the idea of it being like a Sunday morning, like sit in bed and scroll through this on your phone type of thing. I would read one of these like every evening with my daughter, and it was like a nice Sunday evening ritual. I was like, oh, that's really lovely. But I had no like further plans for it, except that like I had a lot of fun making the series, and it felt like the thing I was trying to do, and I wanted to do more of it. And then a publisher came to me and was like, hey, do you actually want to turn this into a book? Because we think there's more here. So I did that. And the book is out in February, coming February. It was my first book, my first like attempt at doing something book length, which is a whole different ball game entirely. And this book has 30 girls from 27 different countries. So like just broadening out the same idea, but also got photos and diary entries from all of them. I generally tend to encourage girls, like I give them guidelines again of like, here are the types of things you can write about, but also like ignore me and write about whatever you want to write about, because this is your space in your life. And like, I'm going to ask you questions about what I think is important, but you know best what is important, not me. So a thing that happened while I was doing this, and I had never sat with so many stories of teenage girls from different places, like all at once, while I was putting the book together. And I started finding connections in ways I didn't expect. Things like there are 2 girls in the book, one, Barbara, who's in Russia, and one who is, I don't know where she is right now, but she grew up in China and she goes to boarding school in the UK. And one wrote in Russian, one wrote in Mandarin. and they could have literally copied the words off of each other, where they talked about the same thing. And it was a feeling I was very familiar with from when I was a teenage girl, like, oh, you know, there's this like big world out there, and I feel like there's so much more interesting stuff, and I'm like in this boring town, and I just like want to go out and like do cool things. Like, why am I stuck in such a boring place? And then they both had experiences that, like, the girl in Russia ended up staying home, and the girl from China came to the UK for college, and then they both reflected on that, and they were like, you know, there are also joys in home, and like maybe it is worth like being like grateful for what you have at home, and there are good things in our boring towns as well, and like going far away isn't always the best thing. And it was amazing. They're both also like 15, 16 and very wise, and I feel like I turn to them for wisdom now when I'm feeling down. I'm like, oh yes, you know, there are interesting things at home as well, like it's okay. But it was interesting where I was finding a lot of connections where girls were talking thematically about the same things, which makes sense because like, despite, you know, all the different ways in which lives unfold and the circumstances people exist within, like the crux of what it is to be a human in the world is pretty much the same. And like the ways in which girls are silenced, policed, all that is also like very much the same everywhere. And so the circumstances girls are dealing with everywhere are also very similar. So realizing that, I thought a lot about like, okay, this is great, like I'm doing this thing, but where else can girls turn to, like, to see their voices reflected and their stories reflected, right? Like, what are they reading, and what's helping them get through the days and like make them feel less alone? Because I'm reading their stories and recognizing that they're very far from alone, both with my experience as like an adult and a former girl, but also as a person who's like seeing a lot of adjacent stories and like realizing like, oh, you know, you're feeling really alone. Like I could totally connect you with like this girl, like, you know, you're in Nigeria and you like feel like, you know, you don't have friends or whatever, and like I could connect you with this girl in Argentina who's feeling very much the same way, and like she's on a football team and she like feels like she's missing out on like this like cinematic Hollywood experience of like what friendship looks like, and you both would like love each other. But I couldn't really do that. Like I could do that with individual girls, but that also didn't feel like the point. And so I was wondering like, what can I do that meaningfully scales this idea of like connecting girls and giving them a space. At the same time, I was also thinking about one of the girls in the book. She lives in Haiti, and she lives in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Haiti. There's a lot of gang violence around where she grew up, and she's a chess champion. Like her life is multidimensional and really interesting. And she's also a chess champion at 13, which I'm just like so impressed by because I don't understand chess. It's just like a cool thing to be very good at that young age. And the person who connected with me with her, where a lot of these girls, I met them through local community organizations, and she had written a lot about like stigma and shame she faced for being from her neighborhood. And I was very curious about that, and I asked the people who connected me with her about that, and they said, oh yeah, you know, she understands that outside of this neighborhood, a lot of people think of like her as a bad thing because she's from here. And it meant so much to her that someone in America cared about what she had to say. And that really stuck with me. I was like, oh, that's very much the point of what I'm doing, is like someone cares about what you have to say wherever you are. And I want every girl who like comes in contact with my work to have that feeling of like your voice matters. And there don't seem to be very many places that actually have that ethos of like your voice matters. And looking back, I started thinking about like I went to school in lots of different cities and countries, and I never had that, where I went to the best schools and still like no one ever said your voice matters, right? It was like, here's English class, here is how you like learn to analyze the thoughts of dead white men. It wasn't, you know, here's English class, we're going to teach you how to express yourself. Like those are different things. It wasn't like your thoughts matter. It was like, here's how you analyze the thoughts of other people. And both are important things, but it's also really important to recognize that your voice matters. And I think it goes a long way in just like claiming narratives and who gets to tell stories. And that was a question I was thinking a lot about, which is why I ended up at where I am, where I want to create something now. I'm in the early stages of making a thing based on everything I have done so far, where I'm thinking of it as a digital media organization by and for teenage girls that is very much invested in them and investing in them, and that wants to empower them and help them tell their own stories for each other. So my end user is not an adult anywhere, which is, I think, also rare. And also the creators of the stories are the girls themselves, not adults, trying to tell the girls like what is aspirational, what is cool, and all of that. So what that means is, one is how do you actually like get the stories of girls, right? In my mind, there's also a pipeline problem, which we all talk about ad nauseum, about like diversity in journalism and like how do you get different voices and amplify different voices and all of that. And if different voices in different communities aren't empowered to tell their own stories and aren't given the skills and tools to tell their own stories, then we're never going to actually get different voices in journalism and in media. So the first step is creating workshops to help girls learn how to tell their own stories. I had started out by saying writing workshops, and I'm keeping it very broad to storytelling because I think storytelling exists in lots of formats, as we all know here. And it can be a TikTok video, it could be an Instagram story, it could be like a comic strip. There are lots of ways to tell stories, but a space that basically facilitates storytelling, and a space created for girls, and also not a space where anyone is parachuting in and telling anyone how to tell their own story, right? Like this is very much an investment in building a relationship through local organizations who already like know the community, know the girls, all of that. And then on the other side of it, actually like creating a platform to amplify the girls' voices. So it's great that creating something within the community, where a space where girls can tell their stories to each other and for each other, but also like taking that out to the broader world and connecting their stories to girls elsewhere. So the girl in Argentina can actually read the story, the girl in Nigeria, and, you know, understand that she's not alone. And it's also like a wonderful way in my mind to understand the rest of the world, because so much of what we consume is headlines or influencers, which are two ends of the spectrum. And I feel like this is the in-between. And like, wouldn't it be cool if you had a sense of what the world looked like through girls' eyes? Like, I haven't ever seen that anywhere. And some of the questions I'm trying to think about as I build this is, you know, a lot of people have asked me about, well, this already exists, right? Like communities exist on YouTube, on Instagram. And a lot of the girls I talk to are part of these communities and have found friends through these communities. But so much of it comes through algorithms where, like, I always joke that if I open my Instagram Explore tab, it's the same color palette. Like everything looks the same, right? Like we are fed more of the same thing because people think that the algorithms think that we would be interested in the same thing. And generally what that means is like, if I am a girl who plays football in Argentina, I'm going to get more stories of girls from South America, more stories of girls who play football, but not necessarily like the Nigerian ballet dancer who's having the same conversation with her parents, or the Sri Lankan singer who's having the same conversation with her parents about like, oh, I really want to pursue this thing I'm passionate about, but like I promise I'll get decent grades, maybe not straight A's, but I promise I'll get decent grades. And this is also a good investment. And like, I just feel so misunderstood. Like those are the thematic things that I feel like connect stories, but we often don't get that in terms of what we have access to. Very much want it to be a place for ordinary girls. You know, most girls aren't the Malalas and Gretas of the world, even though the Malalas and Gretas are obviously great, but it's a place where I want girls to see their own selves reflected. It is a community, both within the like actual community-based storytelling workshops, that'll be a regular thing, but also in connecting girls to, like, if you're a part of a workshop in Singapore, I want it to be a thing where you have like a partner workshop, you know, somewhere else, and you can talk to girls in that other place and you kind of go through the journey with each other. And also another thing that I'm thinking a lot about, and I feel like we all probably relate to in this moment, is like TikTok is perhaps the like opposite of this, but that's the only space I can think of where I pick up my phone and I don't feel good anymore. Like I very rarely like consume anything and feel good. And that's the thing I've heard a lot of recently, like in the last couple of years. There just aren't like happy spaces on the internet. And not even happy, but spaces that encourage community, kindness, curiosity, where like we want to listen to each other and we want to hear each other's stories. Like when I look back, I think the closest I can think of that existed is Tumblr, back when Tumblr was a thing. But that's been a long time. Or like LiveJournal and Zanga when I was much younger, and like that was a happy place. But where is that now? And where is that for people who aren't like necessarily performing for camera as well? And I want this to be an investment in girls themselves and an investment in the next generation. I want this to be a space where the girls who are part of this go on to do very big things. Like this is not the end of their story. the end of their story is like the end of their story in life, right? But like this is a space that like helps them tell their own stories, go out and create bigger stories, live their own lives. And like this is in a way like an incubator for girls, talent incubator for girls. So that's what I'm thinking of. And I need help with everything. I tried to think of what I needed help with, and the answer was everything. Right now, I am looking for a partner to build this with. I have existed in all different sides of media, as I think many of us have, where I've been in editorial, developed growth strategy, done product, but I want to partner with someone who's a person who would like want to take on the biz dev side of things so that I can focus on the editorial side of things, which is where I think I do my magic best. And like, I can really like go out and build my own thing. I'm going to need funding soon. So if you have ideas about that, and I just like to talk to smart people about this who want to help me out. So that is the third thing I want to, it's like, you guys are all smart people and you have thoughts about media entrepreneurship and you have thoughts about what media should look like and you have thoughts about what girls would want. And I always want to hear all of those things. That is my spiel.
I think everyone's kind of stunned here. This is amazing. I don't know what to say. Who's got questions to help me out here? So Masuma, this is something I approach with with a lot of self-interest here, because I have a 9-year-old daughter who's on her way to being a woman. And so I want to know how to take her through the next 10 years. And seeing the way the internet is and knowing what I know of the internet, it makes me, it worries me about what she'll pick up and what she'll learn and whether she'll find positive role models there. So all these things are always at the back of my mind, So I love that you're doing this. I think that this is an important effort, and it's absolutely necessary in this space.
Yeah, I was talking to, sorry, Masuma, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just said thank you. Please go ahead.
I was just saying, before the session started, to my friend Janicia, who I think I've known for about 20, much longer, 30 something years, 20, let's just say 20 something years. And, I've known these folks, and then, they've had one daughter, then another, and then they had another kid. And I was saying, you should have brought Amaya to this session. It would be cool to actually see, what she thinks. Amaya's 18, and she's 18, right? And she's going through, like, she's learning about the world on the internet, which might be a terrible place to learn about the world, but she's also learning about the world through you and Rajesh, your husband. So I mean, and you guys are not like full-on internet people, if you know what I mean. I mean, how is, well, you are, but I mean, how does
First you call me old, then you're saying I'm not on the internet, Rashad.
Are those correlated?
No, but how would you navigate the world currently for your children in the absence of a curious kind space on the internet? Or are there other curious kind spaces on the internet that you would ask them to go to?
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm jumping in, Masuma, sorry. I was in tears at one point of time, because I think when you start talking about it, what happens is, no matter how old you are, the kind of trauma that you felt as a child for girl children kind of resurfaces. We all have PTSD from, I'm assuming, from being girls growing up in India and certain South Asian countries. I'm assuming there's a certain kind of trauma all girls feel. We all go through it. And so thank you for that. Also, I've been writing about women for a while, and the one thing that you're right, it's kind of weird. Nobody wants to hear the life stories. They want to hear what happened, how you felt, is there a good picture, what do the neighbors think? But you look at the way we're covering the pandemic now, or the way we cover economic recessions, or the way we cover war. You know what happened. You don't know how somebody got up every day and lived through it. And why? Because we haven't been able to quantify anything, because all these things have always been in the men's domain. You cannot present an opinion without research. But if no one's quantifying your research, like what has happened to you as a woman, how do you present it? So there are books now to say that women's opinions and lives matter. And I think what you're doing is amazing. Unfortunately, I'm also on the editorial side, and I really want to offer whatever help I can.
I mean, I'll take editorial help too. I feel like I'll come back to you in a little bit and be like, hey, do you want to run this in India for me?
Janisha knows how to do that.
Exactly. Hey, Sandeep, why don't you jump in? You're making a really good offer here.
Oh, very impressed, Masuma, with the vision and the idea. And I know the perfect person for you. Her name is Trina. She's a very good friend of mine. She has a huge passion for helping girls and women. She's producing in like an anxiety-based media series for young girls right now. She's on the board of Girls Who Code. She's a member of the Poly Center for Media in the U.S. She also is like a really savvy businesswoman and went to Wharton undergrad with me a long time ago. But she would love what you're doing, and you guys are a perfect match because she's always looking for people who are on the creative, the writing, the editorial side, and she's got the business side of things. So very happy to make an introduction. There's a couple other names that come to mind, but she's first and foremost, I think, the type of person that would like love to collaborate with you on this type of product.
Thank you so much. She sounds great. I will definitely email you. I appreciate that. Yeah. If anyone has any suggestions, I like very much am looking for people to work with. So I appreciate this.
So Masuma, you're seeing all these comments in the chat box, right? Okay.
Yep.
Just wanted to know whether you got that email address. Otherwise, I'll send it to you. But
yes, I have it.
Yeah, co-founders in the room, potential co-founders in the room. You know what to say. Masuma, I had a question, if you don't mind, about the product and the startup. You know, Girlhood now being this platform or this media startup that's now more than a book. And I was curious about. I wrote this long, rambly question, so I'm going to try and make sense of it now. So you were talking about girls being able to tell their stories about their lives, and you also talked about being, telling people stories and who should tell whose stories, and that they should be in charge of telling their own stories. And now you've done that with a book, but now you want to be able to create a platform for them to do kind of the same thing in all these different forums. But is there a way? Would you ever have them tell their own stories, not just to the world, but to each other? Like, would you get on a chat like this, for example, and have them? Would you need translation? Would you need interpretation? I don't know how it would work, but I can't even imagine what would happen with all that intersection of somebody like you said, an Argentinian footballer talking to a Nigerian ballet dancer, and you find all those connections in like live on camera right there. Would that be part of your plan?
Yeah, so I started out by thinking only about the community-based storytelling workshops, and then realized very quickly that like also in the time of COVID, it's just a funny thing to be pitching anyone and like to try to make come to life, because most of us can't meet people in most countries or many countries in the world. And like to start out, I'm thinking about this very much in English because there's only so much you can do, right? And then expanding to other languages, and also it'll very likely, and then I was like, okay, what can you do digitally? Like things like this exist, right? And things like this are beautiful because we have people from different parts of the world having a conversation with each other and together. I was like, oh, well, that's the obvious thing to do in this moment, is bringing together groups of girls from different places. Like it will limit who can be part of it very much based on what technology they have access to, what internet they have access to, who speaks what language, all of that. But in my mind, yes, like to start out, especially, it would be in like, if I'm thinking in the next couple of months, it will be virtual workshops where you would maybe start out with like the first 3 workshops will be girls, in the same city as you. And then it'll expand to like, hey, these 3 girls really seem interested in this workshop in London, seem really interested in writing about, and like they're all really thinking hard about friendship, and like they keep asking questions about like how to be a good friend, and like they're talking a lot about how friendships have changed for them in this time. And also these 2 girls in Ghana are talking about the same thing, and this one girl in Singapore is also talking about it. So maybe what makes sense then is to put the the 5 of them, 6 of them in a group together and facilitate a conversation and a workshop, cater to them, for them, and have them tell their own stories. Like part of the storytelling workshop idea in my mind is also it's a space where the stories don't have to leave the space for it to be meaningful, right? Like the conversation itself is also meaningful.
Absolutely. Hey, Lila, please jump in. I would love to hear your comment.
Okay, Masuma, first of all, I just want to say I am tearing up. Like, I'm really tearing up hearing you share these things right now. And I know, for me and my best friend throughout high school, we always talked about how we wanted a space to connect globally with girls in some sort of media format. And we were like, we're going to do this. We bought a domain. Nothing ever happened because high school is high school and you're worried about other things as you're talking about. And in the past few months especially, so many of my friends have been telling me, like I can't be on these social media platforms anymore. And so many of them are, logging off Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is for a few weeks, or staying on and just like not feeling like it's a safe space, but feeling like if they get off it, they don't have a way to connect with people. And you're talking about this curious, kind space. And I want to be a part of that so badly. So just thank you so much. I am so emotional and excited for what this becomes.
Thank you for that. That's really lovely to hear. And it's very lovely to hear that this is a thing that you want and feel like there is a need for. And I would love to keep talking with you and bring you into the fold of girlhood.
That's amazing. Okay, I'm tearing up now. Okay, Jeanette, go for it. Ask your digital security question.
Oh, hi. I didn't realize that I was going to have to speak, but yeah, I was just...
Sorry. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, but I was curious because like most of your audience will be young women, right? And your contributors as well. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about like how you're going to prevent like say marketers using the platform, or like even the contributors, like how will you provide any advice on how they can like protect themselves online and things like that, since they'll sort of like be putting themselves on like a public platform?
Yeah, this is a thing I've thought about a lot, and I think about it a lot in the context of everything I've done. And I don't have one single answer. I think it's a thing that will develop with time, but digital security for the girls and security for the girls in general is a very important thing. The way I've handled it in the book has been in part by talking to local organizations and folks on the internet to get a sense of like what feels safe for the girls and what doesn't. I haven't used last names. I'm open to girls not using their last names or even their full names. Girls, like this is a thing that I would want to keep having the conversation with girls about. I don't have an answer as such of like this is what like the protocol is to make sure that they're safe, but there will be something in place to make sure that they are safe and that they continue to be safe. And it's, I imagine that as this gets going, I'll also have like a thing on hand of like how do we protect girls from doxing, and like how do we protect them from trolls, and like what do we figure out about like where else do they exist on the internet? How do we protect them in that sense? How do we also make sure that the conversations they're having online aren't things that are going to get them in trouble with their own communities? It's a thing that I thought about a lot with the book. For example, one of the girls is from Afghanistan, and with everything happening right now with the peace talks and Taliban, the question we had was like, is it safe for her to share her name and to share photos of herself? And that's a question I didn't have an answer to. And her family had thoughts, but it was also a question I talked to local organizations about to get a sense of like what feels right and safe for her. And it's never going to be like a one-size-fits-all answer, but it is a thing that I'm very mindful of and want to remain in conversation with like both the communities, the girls, and organizations that are doing work to safeguard the girls.
Hey, Corinne, I'm not sure if you got the answer to your question there in what Masuma just said. Do you want to follow up on that?
Not too much. I mean, it just occurred to me that it's a space that is potentially, for when you're thinking about funding, there's been such a lot of funding that's gone into helping women, grown women, protect ourselves from trolling and online abuse and so on. And, as you were speaking, I was reminded of a friend from years ago who was looking at providing children, both sexes, with the tools and knowledge around basic cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, right? Because the first time they're experiencing a serious trauma that can set up issues around self-esteem or the ability to decide who they date, is when they're in sort of past puberty. So when they're kids at primary school, they just kind of learn stuff and they're not necessarily testing it out as, does that sit well with me as an adult? Does that make sense? So she was trying to do a longitudinal study to see if kids who are given access to CBT techniques might exhibit less mental health challenges as adults. And I suppose, she wasn't able to get funding. So, it's one of those things. But I think we do have that emphasis at the moment on protecting adult women. But I really like the idea of being able to, not in a motherly way, like, you're not able to express yourself online. No one wants that. And, you just won't get buy-in. But perhaps something that's accompanying girls with their mums, or trusted adults, that makes them aware of some of the risks, but also builds a community where the adults go away and they can say, well, I'm being trolled. Well, guess what? I know how to help you with that. Before it becomes a massive problem and you're in your 20s and so everyone's piling onto you and you don't know what to do about it. So that might be a space. And, there's I know a few people in that space, so I might just sort of put some feelers out and be in touch.
That sounds great. Thank you. Yeah. I think
we can but ask, right?
It's a real concern, and it's interesting to hear what different people are doing in that space.
Mm.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thanks, Corinne. Yeah, that gave me a lot to think about. CBT for kids, just to sort of kind of arm yourself to even have that lens, just to sort of tools you can use, social tools you can use, just to have a different lens on things. Wow. Janicia, do you wanna ask your question about funding?
Yeah,
Pat,
just to kind of agree with you about how the 3 buckets for gender reporting, those are the main things. So when you're going to funders, do you feel they're going to ask you, hey, like, what's in it for me? How do you quantify your impact? And you have to tell them. I mean, you're compelling, and you've convinced us. We know where you're coming from. But when somebody's asking you for numbers and stuff, how are you going to handle that?
Yeah, so part of it depends on who the funder is, and what kind of. I imagine there's going to be. I want to get different buckets of money, so it's not just like all coming from one place, one type of place. But there's different kinds of impact, right? There's all the stories we have data about the impact of investing in women and how that basically makes everything better for everyone in a community. And like women's education, I think of this as part of education, like how to express yourself is part of education, and that helps everything from like. I have numbers somewhere of how a woman's earning potential increases, like the economy, the actual like per capita growth increases. It helps battle climate change. All of those things, like investing in women is just like a good investment, and investing in girls is just a good investment, and we know that. So that's one side of it, and the other side of it is, I'm not seeing this as it's a platform for girls everywhere, but it's not a platform with one place that is like specifically the geographic focus, which is both a pitfall and a strength of this. But it also means that there are places where people are like in the last few years have started getting access to phones, right? And they've started getting access to internet. And this is the next generation of users, creators, and consumers. So if you don't want to invest in that, then you're not investing in the future. Like this is an investment in the next generation. Like that is the best investment you can make.
This is where Pat Bird comes in. Pat.
I think this was fabulous, and I endorse everybody, all the other comments and questions. So I had a thought. I'm on the board of a group called Chicas Poderosas, which translates in, do you know them? Do you know Mariana Santos?
I do know Mariana, yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking Mariana would be a great person for you to talk to in terms because she's so tech savvy, and also because of what she's been able to do. They currently have 6,000 members globally, and I know that it's a different approach, but I know that they have a lot of lessons learned, and they've done a lot of, for example, coding for girls, and a lot of communication, and a lot of gathering. I agree with Janicia in terms of figuring out what I would recommend, if I was you, is identify the funders that you would like to work with in terms of donors. I would look at donors first, because you're going to need donor funds to get going, because you don't have a business model, you don't have revenue, anything like that. But really look at the folks that you think can support you. Is it the Craig Newmarks of the world? Is it IWMF? Is it Open Society? I mean, there's so many. The Ford Foundation is very involved in this type of thing. So start looking at them. And I can make some connections with all of the above that I've just said. But start looking at them to figure out if this is something that they're even interested in. And yesterday we had a great presentation with Melanie from Luminate. And even if you get a no, Masuma, that no is just as important. Find out why. Maybe it's too early. Maybe it's not up their valley. But this was brilliant. I also have daughters. They're a little bit older now, but brilliant, brilliant.
Thank you. And thank you for the suggestions. It's really helpful.
So we get to ask the final question. We're slightly running over time now, but you know, Masuma, I'm conscious of the fact that we're just two guys here, right? What can we do to help you?
It's a good question. I mean, I think right now the same things apply for me, where I'm looking for smart people to work with. So those suggestions are always helpful. Keep creating conversations like this, which is a non-answer, but an answer, where I think coming together with other people who are interested in the same things is very helpful and useful, and like using you guys know everyone basically. So that's incredibly helpful as well, to like bring together like-minded folks who have the same questions or are thinking about the same things. I think those are the two most things that are useful for me right now, and I'm sure I will come back with more that I want from all of you.
Please do.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and when we said what can we do to help, we mean the community. I mean, we're so fortunate to be in the middle of this thing, you know, this community that we sort of are fanboying about at Splice and at Beta, and we're really fortunate to have this. And yes, Shirley, exactly right. Shirley said, let's start conversations within the community. So I mean that. We mean that. You know, get in touch with stuff that you need. I like how you time boxed it, and you said, here's what I need right now, here's what I need soon, and here's what I need all the time. But yes, you know, I think you've had a number of people here raise their hands in different ways. I especially love the way Lila raised her hand. By the way, I had zero idea you were 18 years old, Lila, but hey, this was the best way to find out. And I think, you know, Lila's writing up this session, by the way, as one of our Splice fellows. We're extremely proud to have someone with her kind of mind, to have attended all these sessions and hung out. And it'd be great to see what you make of this, you know, going forward, Lila, as maybe just a product that people can use, or a platform, or a media organization of, well, one so far. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been a bit of a mind opener. Thank you, Masuma, for
Thank you,
sharing your
Masuma.
ideas. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.